And we are back. So, before I needed a nature break, the bad side effect of drinking coffee, I guess, we got to the point of stripping the IP from the connection message. So just for the sake of having a bit of reference, I will copy in the log entry like so. There we go. All right, so we know that our parse console line splits this part as the actual log message. So to split the IP, we effectively only need to grab, actually this one doesn't have a space, we only need to grab this part. Now, the port number here will always change. It is a randomly chosen port as part of the normal TCP IP protocols. So the port number is kind of irrelevant for us. The only real thing that we need is the IP address. So let's see if we can split that. Just as before, we can do some pretty quick and dirty string manipulation to get it. So to start with, we shall grab, let's see, blah blah blah, yeah, we'll call this IP string. We know that there will only be one occurrence of open and close brackets, so we might as well just grab that, which would be the log message. We need a substring of that, starting at the first occurrence of a bracket. So since we don't want to include the bracket, we need to remove it. We'll add 1, which would then be the potential slash that may be in there. I have seen instances where it is there and instances where it is not there, but the IP address is typically always there. Same as before, we'll grab the length of the log message minus the position we just found. From here we have, let's see, this part of the log message, and since we don't need the port number, we will simply just search for the first occurrence of a colon and cut the string right there. So IP string equals IP string substring start at the beginning, and grab up to the point of the first occurrence of a colon. Since this position is a length and we're zero based, just passing the position as the length means we will grab up to and including the last character of the IP. Right? Following this, we are not entirely sure whether the leading slash will always be there or not, so we will just replace it just in case. Remove any leading slash. IP string equals IP string replace. Grab that one, replace it with nothing. There we go. That should do it. Now, the next part of this would be to assume that we have an actual IP address in here. So again, here we can go through a ton of different ways of converting this into something usable. again, for the sake of keeping in touch with the actual string handling and string parsing that's going on here, to better showcase how this stuff is actually done, I will go through this assuming that we need to handle each individual part one by one. So first let's see if there's a period in here. If IP string has an occurrence of a period, then we can actually split this. So let's do a IP parts and grab this one and split it at the period. Now, if this is a correct 4-part IP version 4 IP address, then IP parts will have a length of 4. So to verify that, again, I love verifying things, IP parts. If this has a length of 4, then we can fairly safely assume that this may be an IP address. So, in terms of converting this into the byte array that we want, we could go through here and throw in a ton of individual checks of the individual parts, but for the sake of converting it, I'll do another method. So let's go up here somewhere. This would be the console parser. We don't need that. This is the internal helper stuff. So we'll put a method up here. Method convert IP. There we go. Private byte. We want a byte array out of it. We know that we are getting a string array from it. IP parts. There we go. We also have somewhere the fixint. Let's see if we can find that quick. It should be in the console parser. There we go. This should actually be moved up to the helper stuff. So let's do that quick. And since I comes before P, we'll put it here. There we go. Now, for the sake of ensuring that we are actually getting a valid byte out of it, we'll add another one called fixByte. It will take a value, an integer value, and if value is less than 0, meaning it's a negative integer, then we will simply return 0. If it is greater than 255, which is the maximum of a byte, then we will simply return 255, and in all other cases we will return a cast of the value itself to byte. This effectively ensures that we always have an in-range byte value. Ensures that we have an in-range byte value. The value to fix returns an in-range byte value. There we go. And we should probably do this as well. Fix byte. And here. And we'll do the same for this one, which would be the fixint. There we go. Nice and comfy. Alright, so we can collapse that, we can collapse that, and remove the excessive line. There we go. Alright, so we will do a result. We know that it has to be 4 bytes. We could even prefix it or pre-initialize it as localhost just in case. Let's do that. There we go. And then at some point we need to return that result. now it shuts up. All right, so um, first let's check that we actually did get a a length of 4. We have 4 individual parts, and since we have 4 individual parts, we can then loop through them pretty quickly. Less than IP parts length. There we go, and then we can do result dot part equals fixed byte fixint IP parts dot p. Now what this does is it starts by attempting to parse through the string, converting it to an integer, followed by a fix-up to make sure that it's within byte range, and then stuffing it in the result array. And that's pretty much it. First attempts to parse the string as an int, then ensures that the parsed int value is within byte range. Finally puts it into the result array. Job done. Converts a 4-part string array into a byte array for IP stuff. There we go. The 4-part string array to convert, and returns a 4-byte array containing the converted IP. If mismatched, localhost is returned. There we go. All right. Cool. Let's see if we can make use of this. Excuse me. All right. So, let's see. This we basically don't need. We could do away with this as well, but for the sake of readability, split the possible IP string into its individual parts, convert it into a byte array. So this would then be the IP, convert IP parts. There we go. All right. At this point, we should now have the player's name, we should have the player's UUID, and we should also have the IP address that the player connected from. The last thing that we effectively need to fill a player profile is the login time, which is basically just grabbing the current date time. From here, we of course also need to throw this into some kind of online list and expose that, say, as a property, for example. Now, since all of this runs in a separate thread, we kind of need to synchronize between this internal thread that runs the server and thereby also processes the console output, and whichever other thread might be interacting with it. That's something we need to look into, but first we need to add the online list somehow, somewhere. for the sake of finishing this off, we will create a new player profile called player and pass in datetime.now, which is right now. We'll add in the player name, the player UUID, as well as the IP we just parsed. There we go. After this, to do, add to current online players list. Oh, players list. There we go. All right. There's one thing that we still need to do, and that is to force a clear of the player name as well as the player UUID. Since we know for a fact that the server thread is the one that pings the most, at the end of this particular check, we will always force them empty. Force the player name and player UUID variables empty. So we'll do this. And by forcing these two variables to always be empty here, we effectively prevent players from being able to cheat this parser into believing a player has joined. There we go. The reason that this will work is because we know for a fact that the user authenticator log entry will always show up first, followed by a server thread entry that adds in the player name, the IP the player connected from, as well as entity ID and login position. It will always be the next one. So we can pretty safely assume that if the player name and player UUID have been caught, and the next entry contains all of this stuff that we're looking for, then this is the final part of the login process that we need to capture. So, with that in mind, let's see if we can implement some kind of online list. And how do we do that? Well, let's see. We have some properties somewhere. There we go. Let's see. Right down here, for example, let's add in a property called online players. And for this, we will use a list of player profile called, there we go. Now, the cool thing about using a list here is that it has all the list manipulation methods attached to it that we will need to properly maintain this particular online list. So we might as well use it. It's part of the collections namespace, if I remember right. We still need to expose the actual property, so let's do that. List player profile, online players, but we want this to be read-only, so we'll just put the get in there and return that. Contains a list of currently online players, if any. There we go. Pretty quick and easy. All right. Next up, we will go back to our console parser right here, add to the current online players list. So again, to ensure that we don't end up desynchronized when manipulating the online list, we will thread lock it. So this effectively locks this particular variable to this particular thread, and any other thread that wants to access this particular variable will have to wait for this piece of code to finish before it can access that the contents of that variable. What this does is it ensures that any manipulation we do on the online players list is blocked while we're doing the manipulation. Since we're talking about maybe microseconds here, it doesn't really matter if we block it for a bit. But it does ensure that we don't end up with desynchronized data, meaning one thread could assume that we've got 10 players online while another thread thinks that we only have 5. So it's simply to ensure that we always have the data properly synchronized between threads. All right, so in here we then need to add the player that we just created. And that's pretty much job done. Create the player profile and add it to the current online list. Ensures that we keep synchronized data. There we go. Across threads. All right. Cool. Next up, we kind of need to also look for players leaving. We could add an extra event that we could raise whenever a player joins, effectively posting the information through an event. I don't know yet if it's something that we will need. If we at some point need it, we can always implement it. So we'll put in a note here. If needed, add an event that we can raise when a player joins. All right. So next up, we kind of need to look for a player disconnecting. So I'll do a quick copy of this. Before I do that, quick explanation. This particular line is the server posting Sheridan joined the game in chat. At the moment, there are no specific ways of capturing which aspect of the console output actually belongs to the chat and which ones are coming from the server itself. This is down to knowledge of how the Minecraft servers actually do things versus what's dumped in the console output. In a similar fashion, this line, Sheridan left the game, is also a chat posted message, which means it's something that could potentially be unreliable because there are plugins that change these built-in messages. Some are for localization, language changes, some are for more cryptic messages, and so on and so forth. So we cannot trust these. This one, however, is always generated in the exact same way, regardless of how the player is disconnected from the server. This line occurs even if some kind of network error occurs, which kills the connection for the player. So this one we can fairly trust will always show up as informing this player has now disconnected. So we shall look for this one. As we could see, go back here quick, it is dumped in the server thread. So that's part of this block up here. And this reminder we can actually also remove, so let's get rid of this. Alright, server thread. So that would be this part. Else if, and then do some kind of condition. This would be that part. Alright. In this setup, we know that the log message will contain the player name as well as the static message lost connection : and then followed by some kind of message. This might change. We don't know that for sure. Sometimes it's an error message, sometimes it's disconnected. So at least we need to check if this happened. Alright, so let's start by checking the log message. No, not the log level, the log message. Let's see if it has an index of, and we actually need to lower this. If this exists, then let's see if this actually matches one of our players. Now, I'm aware that this potentially could end up with players being able to throw a message in chat stating this particular player has disconnected, blah blah blah. To verify that we actually did get a proper disconnected message, we can A, do a check on disconnected, and B, do an actual check on the entire string, because any server that has an active chat allowing players to communicate will have some kind of formatting of the player names. So far, all the time that I've spent in the Minecraft community, I have never seen a server that allows player chat messages to go out as something like this. Typically, chat messages are always, as in the vanilla format, set up like this, or some variation of something like this, for example, or actual chat components with color setups and text formatting like italic and bold and such. They usually always contain some kind of extra junk that indicates that this is pretty likely a chat message. So in the sense of trying to verify that this is an actual disconnect message, we can simply go in and see if there is some kind of formatting going on with the first word in the actual log message. Okay, so first of all, since we found a message that has the content lost connection : we'll start by splitting the first word. And we can simply do that by doing a typical substring, starting at the beginning and grabbing it to the first occurrence of a space. There we go. Now, some may state that this could potentially fail if no space is in there. However, this condition can only occur if the text lost space connection exists, so there will be at least one space in there. We can even prefix this with another space just to make sure. If somebody tries to trick this into believing that a player left, then this will help us a little bit in terms of preventing any kind of chat cheats. All right, now that we have the first word, the first word is supposed to be a player's name. Check to see if there is some kind of formatting there. All right, so if and excuse me for a second while I check the chat component stuff, which is JSON based. If, for example, somebody runs a server with some kind of color formatting in the chat that puts, say, a rank color on the player's name, then there might be some JSON stuff in there. And this would be an example of something like that. So since we are copying the first word, that effectively means we would get something like this. And this tells us that there are some illegal symbols in there, because a player name cannot contain a curly bracket, it cannot contain quotation marks, it cannot contain a colon, as far as I know. And there are tons of other things that are potentially illegal in there. So by looking for some of these things, we can figure out whether this is a potentially chat formatted word, or if this is a clean word. So let's see what's actually in here, and we'll go from there. So if the first word, for example, contains a less than, and I will get back to setting these up properly. If it contains an index of a greater than, or it contains an instance of, let's see, a curly bracket, first word, closing curly bracket, the regular brackets, and the closing one. There we go. We also have a instance of a colon, for example, and we could even look for a quotation mark, just to, there we go. Okay, so what we do here is we check to see if there is a less than, a greater than, curly bracket open, curly bracket close, bracket open, bracket close, colon, and a quotation mark. These are all effectively illegal characters for this particular setup, because we know that we are expecting a raw username or player name. So if any one of these occurs, then this is effectively a illegal posting, and thereby we can assume that this is most likely a chat message. Now, the quick and dirty way of doing a check on this is simply just add in the output from these, and then checking how many results we get. Since each one of them gets or should result in a -1 result, and we are adding them together, that should effectively leave us with, let's see, how many? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's 8 characters we're looking for, and the result is this should lead us to a result of -8. If this is the case, then we pretty much can assume that this is potentially a raw player name. So the next part is to see if this is actually in the list, for the sake of again keeping things synchronized. We will lock the online list and then loop through it to see if let's see, we'll do an int player index. Let's see if I remember right, the list allows us to remove by index, or we can just do it by the profile itself. Yeah, alright, anyway. If online players for p equals 0, typo again, I'm pretty good at this. This has a count. There we go. So if this dot name equals first word, since this is all case sensitive, we should be able to match these up. Then we will store the count index and break out of the loop. There we go. Alright. We can even do this inside here. Now, if we did get a player index, that indicates that we actually did find a player in the online list. So let's see if we can actually remove it. Which would be here. Remove at allows us to specify an index, which we already have. So we'll instruct the list to remove this particular entry, and that effectively removes that player from the current online list. And here again we could add an event that can be raised when a player disconnects. There we go. Alright. Now if we wanted to do further checking to ensure that this is the right or correct log entry, we could do the check here by building part of the string and then comparing that initial part of it. Now this one can sometimes be replaced with an error message, so the comparison would be something like grabbing the player name from the online list, adding lost connection : to it, and then doing a substring on the initial log message and comparing the two case sensitive. And if they are identical, then we can pretty safely assume that this was the correct message. Since we're doing some proper checking to root out any occurrence of illegal characters in names, this should suffice in terms of actually finding it. Alright. There we go. So, for the sake of us being able to see that this is actually working the way it's supposed to, we shall put in a debug message. System diagnostics debug right line. Let's do this again just for the sake of it. No, actually um, plus player.name has joined the game. Whoops, there we go. And we will do a similar down here, which would be right here. There we go. Has left the game. Now these should only show up in, actually we'll have to grab the name. No, we can use the first word. Yes, we'll use that. First word, there we go. Now these two debug messages should show up in our output, just to indicate that this particular list is actually updated. So let's give it a run and see if this actually works, or if it ends up crashing horribly, which we of course hope it doesn't. Fire up. There we go. Alright. And let's give an attempt at joining this thing and see what happens. Da -da 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 -da. Holy smokes. It actually posted the Sheridan has joined the game just like we put it up. And now let's see if it also posts the disconnect message. And there you go. It actually did post the has left the game. So this effectively means that we now have the ability to capture players joining the server as well as players leaving the server. Now, since we may want to update the UI, it might be an interesting idea to add in actual events that we can hook, so that our application UI can be properly updated, say in case whoever is using it is currently looking at the online list for this particular server. So let's get this stopped. There we go. And then shut this down. There we go. Alright, so let's go add in a couple of events for this. Now we can do these events as just dumb events informing that some random player joined, and then the main thread can loop through the list, online list, and then do whatever it needs to do, or we can properly pass the data associated with this particular player as part of event arguments. And here we potentially end up in a heated debate on how to design events. The heated debate is basically rooted in whether or not you should create specific event argument classes or not. Coming from an old school background, I know for a fact that every time you instantiate a class, you create extra code on the heap, which means more memory usage. Whereas if you pass variables, you don't end up having that extra object reference that you would typically have when you instantiate a class, which means the overall data transfer footprint will always be smaller when passing variables compared to greater when you pass a new class instance. So it's a question of debating whether or not you should use less memory or more memory in processing your events. I know that Microsoft prefers using the event arguments classes on pretty much anything and everything they do, but that's the main reason that booting up Windows 7 now eats up 3 gigabytes of memory for no reason. So it's something to consider. I have my preferred way of doing things. Others have their preferred methods, and it is, again, as always, up to the individual developer, personal preference and all that. In any case, we need 2 new events. One of them would be player joined, and the other one would be player, let's do parted. Why not? Join and part. Alright, so for these, we need a delegate. So we can do an event handler, and then we can discuss what kind of information to pass. Here it might be beneficial to pass all of the data relating to this particular player. We could potentially just pass the entire player profile itself. So why not? It's, after all, just a regular struct at the moment. Now, if we at some point expand this to become an actual class, that might not be such a great idea. Again, in terms of how much memory you effectively spend transferring data from one thread to another. So here I think I will stick with just passing along the player name, the UUID, and the byte array containing the IP, and that's it. For more specific information, we can always query the online list as needed. So here we'll pass the player name, the player UUID, as well as the 4 bytes for the byte array. There we go. Then we declare the event and handler. There we go. And then we'll do a method for raising the event. And here we will just do a ref of the player profile player. What ref does is it transfers or specifies a pointer to the variable that contains the data instead of actually passing the data itself, thus reducing the amount of memory spent passing data from one method to another. It's more memory cost efficient doing it this way. Okay, so we need to raise the event, so we'll invoke it with the name, the UUID, and the IP. There we go. This would then be the represents a method that handles a player joined event. There we go. The name of the player that joined, the Mojang UUID of the player's account, the IP address the player connected from. There we go. This triggers when a new player joins the server. There we go. Raises the player joined event. There we go. All right. Then we need a similar setup for when players disconnect. So let's do that. Grab a copy of this so we can save a bit of typing. This one would be the event handler. And in this case, let's use the exact same information. Might as well, since we know that we have it available at the time when we need to trigger the event. We need the grab this event declared, which would be there, and we also need to declare a method to raise the event. So, and here we will see if we can do a ref of that as well. This might not be doable due to the fact that we will be indexing a specific entry within a list, but we'll see whether it decides to puke on us or not. This would then be the player. There we go. And as before, invoke it, grab the name, the UUID, as well as the IP. There we go. And put some documentation in there. Represents the method that will handle that handles a player parted event. There we go. The name of the player that parted disconnected. The what did we put up there? The Mojang UUID of the player's account. Yeah, we'll just grab these since they are virtually identical. There we go. The IP address that the player, blah, yeah, it's all fine. Alright, triggers when a player disconnects parts, disconnects from the game. There we go. And raises the player parted event. Sweet. Alright, let's see if we can implement those down here. So that would be right about here. And just for the sake of argument, we'll move this down here and then raise the player joined event. So on player joined ref player, since we already have the profile right here, that should be enough. And again down here, this is again done inside a thread lock, so we probably want to see if we can carry the data out of this sync lock so we can properly raise the event afterwards. So for the sake of doing that, we will do a player profile here called player and just do a new one. There we go. And for the sake of consistency, this would be the new byte. And we'll just do, there we go. Alright, now at least we can check. So, if this actually occurs, then we will grab a copy of what's on the online list, and that would be the player index. There we go. Um, we can then afterwards use this to verify that it was actually removed outside the loop, or sorry, outside the thread lock, which would be here. So if player.name.length greater than 0, and we can do the same for the UUID, that should suffice. Then did we find the player that disconnected? Yes, we did. So raise the event on player parted, and since we grabbed a copy, we can easily reference that. There we go. Nice. With this, we now have 2 additional events that we can hook. So let's go see if we can add these to the mix and do something along these lines. Let's see. Server starting, server started, server shutting down. Since this is sorted by logical order, we will now add in these 2 events right here. For the most part, they can only take place after the server has started and before the shutting down event triggers, so this should be fine. Add in player joined and the player parted event as well. There we go. And again, logical order. Reverse these, and then we move them up where they belong, which would be right here. Since we have the server started up here and we have the server shutting down here, they belong right here. There we go. Now, since we're doing a lot of cross-thread stuff, and this part needs to be able to update parts of the UI, we will do the cross-thread migration of data as needed. There we go. So we shall invoke new action, and no, there we go. And as the event parameters specify, we need to transfer a string, another string, and a small byte array. And we need to point at this one, and then pass the player name, the player UUID, as well as the IP. There we go. Bug out. Pass this. It's safe to mess with the UI and this data. Alright. And we pretty much need to implement the same stuff here. So for the sake of saving a bit of typing, since they are virtually identical, grab this and then simply just change the method reference. There we go. And here, right here, we can then do or rather we should be able to grab our form right here. We'll add in a small list box just for the sake of things. Actually, no, we'll do this instead. And then move this down to, I don't know, here. And then just throw in a list box here somewhere, if I can find it. There it is. And there we go. Alright, so if a player joins, then we will grab the list box, grab all the items in it, clear them, and then we'll loop through. Actually, key is probably more accurate. Minecraft server dot online list dot count, and then just add them to the list box. Craft server online players dot name. Boom. That's it for the joined, and we'll do the same for the parted. Let's see if this works. There might be some thread issues, but we'll see. Alright, start this up. Here we go. Let's see. Module was exception thrown, system null pointer. Yeah, that's the weird one. I don't quite know why it happens. Oh, it happens for some reason. Anyway, join in, see what happens. Boom. Holy smokes. It's now listing that I'm online. And let's see what happens if I disconnect. And it clears the list. So that seems to be working nicely. Pretty cool. Okay. Now we actually do have a proper online list for our launcher. So stuff is definitely moving in the right direction. Now let's get this shut down. There we go. And quit. Boom. All right. We can now properly maintain a list of players based on the console output from the game server itself. We can properly hook events that tell us the state of the server. Welcome back, Sir Pinwheel. Yes, we have definitely made progress. I'll demonstrate again, just for the sake of it. We can start it up as we've been able to before. We are now fully capable of correctly catching when players join and populating a standard list box. What is not shown in the list box at the moment is that we are actually also capturing the UUID of the player as well as the IP that the player connected from. And they are passed as part of the player join and player parted events. So those are now part of it as well. Holy smokes, that's loud. Let's do the clear quick. There we go. All right. It will also correctly detect when players disconnect and update the list box accordingly. So part of what we have now is a pretty decent monitoring setup that lets us, through events, keep track of what the server is doing. Is it starting up? How far along is it? Has it finished its startup process? Have we connected to the server through Archon? We can use the stop command to tell the server to stop and shut down. Later on, we can add additional methods to, say, for example, clear the weather, or if a new player, for example, somebody new joins on the server, and that particular player decides to put a specific message in chat, we could even have our application catch that and then, say, for example, give that player a diamond or a stack of diamonds. or whatever else we want. Keep in mind that through Archon we have full console access, so we effectively have full administrator access on the server and can pretty much do anything. Um, One method that might be interesting to add is a method that we can call passing two player names, which would then teleport one player to the other. Um, that's something that we could easily do now that we have an online list. The online list is currently populated by this structure, which tells us the exact time that this particular player logged on. We have the name of the player, we have the account UUID, as well as the IP that the player connected from. These are both passed as part of the two new events. Right here, player name, player UUID, and the IP. And again for the parted, exactly the same thing. Nice. Alright, so with this in hand, I think it's about time that we do some UI cleanup, because if we take a quick look at our test application surface, I hate to admit it, but it kind of looks like something thrown out of a blender. So this might be a good time to effectively dump everything in here and start from scratch and see if we can come up with a better UI that suits our needs. Now, what exactly do we need the UI to be able to do? In the initial streams I did, I basically set the scenario so that we down the line potentially could host more than one server using this launcher. So it might be a good idea to see if we can have the UI reflect that. Now, to do that, we may have to build some kind of custom list that properly displays the server for us, including its current state, maybe list how many players are on, maybe grab some information from the server properties thing to properly display, and so on and so forth. We probably also want some kind of interface to list who's online. Down the line we could add methods to the server host thing that allow us to say, for example, whitelist a person, or kick a person from server, or ban a server if we run into a griefer, for example. Lots of different things that we can do. But in those situations we kind of need to interface with the players themselves, so it might be beneficial to have a separate UI for that. Another thing that I personally want to add to this project is, and this is again a little bit down the line, I would like to add in some restart options where we can schedule specific restart times. Say, for example, I want this server to restart twice a day. One of the restarts will be a maintenance restart where we'll grab a backup of the current world and then start the server up again. The second restart will just be a refreshing restart. That's particularly beneficial for modded servers since they tend to kind of end up becoming pretty sluggish and laggy if they run for too long. The primary reason for that happening is half the mod developers out there are maybe at novice state and don't exactly always know how to properly clean up after themselves, don't properly know how to efficiently instantiate only the objects that they need, and they probably don't keep track of all the different variables that they use, which ends up with them effectively creating somewhat bloated applications in terms of these mods being added. It's definitely seen before that modern Minecraft servers tend to end up eating up a crap ton of memory, and nobody knows exactly why. Bloated mods would be the main reason. Usually a regular server restart will fix that particular bloat issue. So it would definitely be beneficial if we can go and restart at scheduled times of day, for example. I know that there are tons of different plugins for Minecraft servers that will say force a restart every 8 hours. But the downside of using such plugins is that if they are time range specific, then those plugins usually count from the last time the server started up. So if you have to, say, for example, shut it down to fix a user account, then that timer will be reset and count 8 hours from this server launch and forward, which means your community can no longer trust when the server will actually restart. So personally, I prefer fixed specific times over a time range or time interval any day. So this will eventually have the option to schedule a specific time of day points where the server should restart. In one of the upcoming streams, I will dig into the individual chat components of the Minecraft chat. When you wish to send a chat message to the server through, say, the console or from a command block, you have to follow the JSON chat component structure to have it properly display something. At least if you want to put things like colors in there. Of course, you can always use the standard /say and it'll just output server and whatever message. But in a sea of white messages, a message coming from the server in white is pretty likely to be overlooked. So we will definitely dig into the actual JSON chat components and put some coloring stuff in there. Because I would like this to be able to warn the players, say 10 minutes before shutdown or restart, that we're doing this in 10 minutes and then do a countdown from there. And of course, I'd like to put some colors in there, so definitely a good idea to dig into those as well. Alright, so at the moment we have a ton of crap in here. We have some old code, we have some new code, we have some test code, and a lot of this stuff is not really needed all that much anymore. At least not until we know how we want the new UI to look. So let's start by getting rid of all this junk. Bye-bye. See ya. Wouldn't want to be ya. And from there we have a crap ton of junk in here to get rid of as well. So let's close this one. We don't need this one anymore. These are all the different controls that we used to have on it, so we can get rid of these as well. There we go. Let's dump this. Boom. The load event, yeah, we definitely still need that. So we'll keep this. And we will also keep the shown event, like so. And this we don't need. But we still need to hook the shown event. So now we're back to scratch. Absolutely nothing in there. And the next part would be figuring out exactly how we want to do this. Now, as I said, we've pre-configured this to be able to support more than one server running. But to do that, we kind of need a collection of the server host class so we can keep track of the individual servers running. For now, we don't particularly need to dig into this. We just need to keep it in mind. Because we, down the line, want to be able to run more than one server, we may want to try to design the UI to be capable of supporting multiple Minecraft servers running. So, with that in mind, we kind of need to have some kind of list option. So if we try to build a UI template that will support the most needed information, we can take it from there. So let's see. As far as I remember, there is the option to specify a server icon. And if memory serves, that particular server icon is effectively a 64 by 64 pixel PNG file that you basically just drop into the server folder. And whenever a game client attempts to gather server information, it will automatically download that PNG and display it in the server list. So what we could do is throw in a random PNG here and then have our UI list show that PNG in here as well. I think we should at least build some support for it. So we know that we're going to need a spot to put that. So for the moment we're just putting in some placeholders. Nobody's saying that we have to do these, but we'll just do it for the sake of let's see what we can come up with. Alright, so placeholder there for a server icon. Since we are running these locally on the same computer, we can easily load a PNG from a disk and throw it into Picturebox. So another thing that we probably want to look into is whoops, it seems that I may accidentally have trashed the server properties, which means there is a bug in my init class somewhere. Not good. Well, luckily I made a backup of it right here. So I'll just put that back in place. Get rid of this, and then we'll go see if we can figure out what's wrong with the server ini file class. Sorry. Good thing that we caught that one. All right, so let's see if we can figure out exactly what went wrong here. This would be the internal helper methods, update server properties. This is where we are doing the modifications. So let's see if we can figure out what's wrong with this. Not much in there. Grab some coffee. There we go. The nectar of life. Okay, so breakpoint. Now we've set it there, and then we'll add some quick test code to do this. So grab two of these. Let's see, yeah, we'll just do button 1 and 2. Should be fine. We need the server profile config loaded, so we'll do that. Profile config, and I can't remember whether we whoops, need to specify something here. We don't. Alright, so alright, Sir Pinwheel, have a great day. Let's see. We've got these set up so they should be fine. We still need the server profile stuff. Server host, Minecraft server equals new. Oh, actually, this one needs to be like this. So we'll put it up here somewhere. Minecraft server, new server host. We'll put one in there. All right. Minecraft server dot configure server, which would need the Minecraft path, the jar, and the memory size. There we go. And then we need to set up let's see, the remote console port. There we go. Let's use 2580 this time, just for the sake of it. And we also want to use the randomized, so let's do that. And then we will fire this up. Now, since we don't only need this for debugging purposes, we won't put in all the other extra stuff. We'll just assume that we do things in the correct order, so we should be okay here. Let's see what happens. This may crash horribly. Ah, nice. We can debug. Cool. All right. So let's see what's going on here. Grab this. That one should go true. Load. Update this. Ah, it's actually setting this to false right away. Yeah. We definitely need to change that. Okay, so that's the reason why. We'll get rid of this. Oh, actually, the only trouble here is that I haven't set it here. Should use this method instead. So doing this is pointless because we can specify this instead. There we go. That's probably the reason why it's clearing out the server properties. That one's forced to. Yep. Okay. Let's see. There we go. And just to. Oh, actually, we'll stick with it. All right. This was the wrong window. There we go. Check that this actually contains some data still. Yes, it does. All right. And we'll give this another run and see. All right. Let's see if we ended up derping up completely. Now it's saved, so we can do a quick check here. And this part is at least set up correctly. All right, so since we already have the breakpoint here, we will at shutdown get to this point as well, so we can check that it's correctly changing these and only removing the important password. So keep running. And it's now up and running, and we're connected to it, so we can easily click the stop button. And now that the server is shut down, we'll see if this does what it's supposed to. So there we go. And grab the content, and now it's correct. There we go. Well, nobody's perfect, so errors do occur. We are only human. All right. Sweet. All this stuff is functional. So we got the bug fixed. Updated, and today is April 11th, 18. Bug fix. Fixed virtual grouping not working correctly. There we go. Done. Now we can get rid of this, we can get rid of this, and this and this and this, and kill that one. There we go. And then we can safely remove these two, and safely remove these two events. Nice. Alright. Moving on, designing UI. Alright. The reason I went into the server properties file was to see what kind of data we want to split from it. Now, all this setting stuff in here is stuff that we can easily load from the server properties file and display as part of the server profile for the server it's supposed to be running. So we shall go in here and have a look-see. Let's see. The one thing that would be interesting is to fetch the MOTD. Keep in mind that MOTDs for Minecraft servers can actually contain color encoding for the message to display. So it's something that we may want to consider at some point, either modifying or at least stripping, whichever the case may be. Since we're going to mess with chat components down the line anyway, that would be the perfect time to implement some kind of text stripping there in case we decide to implement support for colored MOTD messages. Okay, another entry that would be interesting to fetch is the configured port number. The reason for that is that since we are running or want to support being able to run more than one server on the same IP, it might be beneficial for us to be able to distinguish each individual server by its port number. So that's definitely an aspect that would be interesting to grab. Since we have a bunch of different options here, we could also set up an actual separate window that allows us to configure some of all these settings. We could do that, but for the moment let's grab my config samples here. So this one is from the 1.12.2 server. And this one is from the other server that I have running here. It is whitelisted, so there's no point in attempting to join it. You won't be able to. But as you can see, there is a major difference between the number of settings in these two. That's because these settings have changed as new features and additions have been made to the server over the years. This one is actually from a 1.7.10 running a custom mod pack that I put together. Hence some of all these weird settings like the level type and a lot of other stuff missing. In any case, some of these properties are identical across server versions, some of them being spawn NPCs and PvP and so on and so forth. Those are definitely settings that we can assume for the most part will always exist within a server properties file. So we could do a server configuration window that allows us to mess with these without having to modify the actual server properties file. See, something like, for example, spawn animals, that is a true false setting, so it can only contain true or false, which we could easily translate to a checkbox that we can put a check mark in, or a tick as it's also called, which would for the most part make it a little quicker to configure it. If we do implement something like this, it would also allow us to pre-configure some of the options for a new server instance. Say, for example, we want to start a fresh server instance, throw the jar in there, fire up the server launcher, do a bunch of pre-configuration, and then start it up right away. So we don't have to go through tons and tons and tons of things to get everything pre-configured the way it's supposed to. Sometimes it takes a couple of restarts to actually have a finished Minecraft server configuration that does what it's supposed to. It can be a little bit tedious. So we could implement a separate server configuration window that just lets us do this a little quicker and easier. Another thing that the fresh Minecraft server requires is that after it has generated the EULA.txt, it requires us to change EULA from its default value of false to true, to indicate that we agree with their end user license agreement. Until this particular file exists with EULA equals true, the server refuses to start up. So whenever you go in and start to try and build a new server, you will always run into the issue of having to either put this file in there or have the server generate it, shut it down, and then change this setting and start it up again. So tedious. If we did a pre-configure stuff, we could easily have it look for this particular file. If it doesn't exist, pre-generate it so we can actually fire up the server the very first time in the first go. Anyway, just some of the things that we can do. We might as well see if we can get away with having the server launcher do most of the tedious stuff for us. Okay. Let's see. We want to put in some kind of MOTD blah blah. We could potentially add in the option of actually naming these individual instances, which could become a custom name for it. Config custom name this server. We may want to show the port to connect to. Connect at and then port number. There we go. We may want to have some status indicating what the server is doing at the moment. Put a label here, go status shut down. We may want to list how many players are currently online. We could grab from the properties, there is a property in here, yep, right here, max players. That is the configured total number of players available on this server. That's something that we could grab and thereby do something like players 0 of 10. We could even turn that label into something that's clickable, which would then pop up the user list if the server is running. Plenty of options. We also want to implement some kind of start-stop. We could add in some options to control whitelisting. We could even grab the whitelist that's already configured. This one shows my account plus my second account. So these two accounts are currently whitelisted on this vanilla server. This is something that we could add into our application UI as well. If it is a non-whitelisted server, we could even put in functionality that allows us to, say for example, switch the server to whitelisted and then mass kick everyone that's on in case we need to do some kind of service maintenance, whatever. There are plenty of things that we can do with this server launcher given the power that we have to control the Minecraft server through this application. So tons of options. But we definitely need some kind of start-stop. Let's put that in here. Start, stop. We could do this with icons, for example, clickable icons. What else? Say we need to, I don't know. Oh, yeah, right. We need to put in some kind of schedule stuff. Maintenance schedules. And what else? Well, maybe a separate config thing for it. Configuration window, maybe. There we go. We also need to have an option that allows us to add a server profile. But we should probably go through our server profile thing and see what kind of changes we can make to it. At the moment, we don't have all that many available options in the actual configuration. So we may want to consider expanding a little bit on the server profile config and then maybe see if we can migrate the current singular properties over to a list of properties instead. So we can properly mess with configuring individual server instances. and then see if we can do uh, some kind of UI that fits this a little better. All right, so what do we know? We know that we want to be able to give this a custom name. So we definitely need to add that as a configurable property. We also need to be able to either configure or grab from the config what port it's connected to. The MOTD, these would probably better fit a separate window that deals with the actual server properties. So we may want to start out doing a separate window for that. And then change our actual server configuration stuff afterwards. This one at the moment contains two groups. One of them has a profile count. The other group is just a profile number, and then has the path for the jar name itself, and whatever memory was configured. So we may want to change this drastically. Okay, let's look into creating a proper server properties editor. So for that, we shall need to grab another window. Nope. Derp. There we. Yep, I'm a derp. Let's try this again, shall we? And I need to do that here. Windows form. There we go. Okay, so we will call this, I don't know, server config dialog. There we go. All right, so since we are messing about with a dark theme at the moment, I figured we might as well see about changing the look and feel of this thing. So let's see if we can find some. There we go. All right, and we'll do some server configuration. We'll have this center on screen, and then up here we shall add in a dialogs and move it up there. There we go. Proof. All right. Okay, so what are the most important configuration options for a Minecraft server? There be tons of them, my friend. Let's grab a look or take a look at the 1710. That is the aged setup. It's kind of outdated, but at least it will give us a good point of reference to start from. So let's do this quick. Grab a copy over here and go through it. These we don't need to worry about. Generator settings, that's the world generation stuff. Up permission level, that's a setting that allows you to determine what kind of access server operator has. As far as I know, Archon overrides this. The level name would be interesting to have there. This we don't particularly need to worry about. Let's see. Allow flight, announce player achievements, blah, 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 blah. This one is a pretty high priority. So let's move that up there. Level type, that's part of the generation stuff. Force game mode, not really needed. Level seed, that's also part of the generation stuff. Server IP, if it needs to be bound to a specific IP, we should probably have that in there. The max build height is also part of all the other different stuff. Spawn NPCs, that's an actual gameplay option. So let's grab that. We have the spawn animals as part of that. We have, let's see, PvP is part of gameplay. We have spawn monsters, which is part of gameplay. And let's move this up here. There is difficulty. Difficulty. If you take a look at the official Minecraft wiki, there's a lot of technical information up there, including a description of these different settings, where one is easy, sorry, 0 is easy mode or peaceful, 1 is normal, and 2 is hardcore, I think. I can't remember. But this determines the difficulty setting. And these, of course, control what kind of other options are available. Hardcore mode should probably be up here. If this is enabled, then you can only die once. Once you're dead, you effectively lose access to the server or the game. Let's see, online mode, we should probably move up here. Resource pack per enable command block. Well, I guess these are part of the more technical things. Game mode. Game mode determines the actual game mode. This is for survival. Set this to 1 to have players join in as, in creative mode. The idle timeout. This is basically the, okay, you've been AFK for 10 minutes and the server kicks you for being AFK. Note about this is that even though the option is in there, it may not be available on whichever specific server you are currently using. For the most part, community servers use Essentials, and Essentials internally handles kicking players when they've been idle for too long. And of course there are similar plugins that do the same thing. Vanilla-wise, my experience is that half the time it works, half the time it doesn't. So it's kind of okay. So generate structures actually also belongs up here. This effectively determines whether things like villages and those ocean temples are generated or not. This deals with, let's see here, total number of players that can be on the server at any given time. View distance is how many chunks from the chunk you're standing in. It determines the radius of chunks that the server will keep loaded around you. So having a view distance of 7 effectively means 7 chunks out from the chunk you're in all 4 directions. So that's effectively 7 plus 7 plus 1. That's 15 times 15 chunks for a view distance of 7. If you go up to a view distance of 10, you are effectively adding in 11 times 21 times 21 chunks per player. and each chunk that the server keeps loaded in memory takes up a certain amount of memory, just keeping those loaded. So if you're on a server with, say, 50 players, then it's 21 times 21 chunks in memory times 50 players. So that's quite a bit of memory. Lowering the view distance will definitely increase performance on the server and decrease the amount of memory spent. Spawn protection determines how many blocks are effectively protected by the server from the actual spawn point, which is something that you can change. And again, this works on a radius base, at least to some extent, though the spawn protection is actually radius divided. So if you specify 16, it will divide up and have a radius of 8 from the block you're spawning on. Alright, so some of this stuff we may need to mess with. Let's see, this one should be configurable, and we should probably put that up here somewhere along with this. And we also want to have a look at the whitelist stuff. And we should probably put that in here somewhere. Put it there. Alright, so as you can see, some of these, or most of these, are true-false, so a checkbox should suffice for those. The rest of it is either text or specific numeric values. So we can fairly easily build a UI that works off these particular settings. Alright. Announce player achievements should probably be up here somewhere as well, since this is a before game mechanic stuff, I guess. Enable query, allow flight. This one will be controlled by our application, so this one we definitely don't need to mess with, since the server launcher will need to Archon connect to the server to actually be able to issue commands. This one we'll ignore. This is again one of those configurable things. Enable command block, true or false. The default value for this is false, of course. In this particular setup I've enabled it because I needed some command block stuff. For the most part, people very rarely ever change the max build height, but we could put it in as an option. We'll see whether it makes it to the UI or not. Alright. I think I need another quick nature break, so I shall be back in a few. And after that we will start building the UI to handle all this stuff. Alright, I will be right back.